And now for the third of the television election broadcasts by the Labour Party.
Good evening. This is an election roundup. We've been going through the papers trying to find the kind of things that are really on people's minds through this election campaign. And I've got a pile of papers here, today's papers, the Conservative leaflets, the Conservative campaign guide and things of that kind. And I'm going to put to the people we've got here the questions that I think are in all your minds. And to answer them, we've got four well-known members of the Labour Party. Most of them I expect you already know, but if you don't, there's, on reading from left to right, there's Mr. James Callaghan, Mr. Herbert Morrison, Lady Megan Lloyd-George, and Mr. Hugh Gaitskell. The first question, which I'm going to put to them, hits you from every headline today. I don't need any particular question, any particular paper for it. It's the problem of strikes. We've been having strikes, we're threatened with 2 or 3 more. What can we do about it?
Well, I understand the public concern, which I share. And not only do I share, but I think every leader of the Labour Party would share. Moreover, let there be no illusion about it, the average trade union leader doesn't want strikes. He prefers to settle things by peaceful negotiation. And therefore it isn't a matter of being sought by the official leadership of the trade union movement. One thing I'd better make clear straight away is that I don't like the unofficial strike, because that in a way is a strike against trade unionism itself. It's not a good thing. It is irresponsible, and it brings the unions into difficulties and indeed into public conflict. Therefore that's bad, and they ought not to happen, and they need not happen if all trade unionists attend their branch meetings. But some of the strikes are official. Mind you, let's have a sense of proportion about it. The number of days lost after the First World War, under the anarchy of the Conservative-dominated government that followed the First World War, the number of days lost was very, very much greater. I believe about 18 times as great. However, that doesn't comfort me on the present situation. And I can only say, let us hope that between now and the date that these disputes were scheduled to begin, that the parties can come together, that the Trade Union Congress can be helpful in this situation as it has been on recent disputes. And let us hope very, very much indeed that they do not eventuate. And I would appeal to everybody concerned, everybody, to see whether they can't settle this without having recourse to industrial war.
But Mr. Morrison, it's all right appealing to people and talking about the past, but you're going to be the government. What are you going to do about it?
Well, if we were the government, we should certainly bring the parties together. We should cooperate with the TUC. We should try to see that the fair and the just thing is done.
Yes, I'd like to add a word or two, if I may, here. You see, I think this is largely a question of a sense of responsibility. And the trouble is that there are too many people in the country at the moment who are disregarding the consequences of what they do for the public. And I'm bound to add this. I think that if you have an atmosphere in which the whole thing is grab what you can and don't bother about anybody else, well, you get everybody grabbing what they can. And sections of workers who are, after all, pretty powerfully organized and very strong indeed under conditions of full employment, take the hint and they go ahead.
That's very true.
But how will you change the atmosphere?
Well, I would may I give you an example? When Sir Stafford Cripps was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he went down to the TUC and he talked to them and he appealed for restraint, but he was able to do that, as indeed so was I, because we had also appealed for restraint and got it indeed from other sections of the community. But you see, you can't do that. A Chancellor of the Exchequer who believes in the free-for-all can't go down to the TUC and say, please, may we have a little restraint in wage claims? It simply doesn't add up at all.
And will you go down to them? Did you go down to them?
Well, I did, certainly.
Oh, yes, certainly. You see, Hugh Gaitskell is quite right. This government is telling everybody, every section of the community, do as you like. Make as much money you can for yourselves. Have no regard to any social code. or the general public interest. Consequently, they're wrecking the moral code of the nation to pull together for the good of the nation. And they can't have it both ways.
What they call releasing, what Mr. Butler calls releasing the human spirit, I suppose.
I expect it is. I would say releasing the inhuman spirit.
Well, all right. Certainly releasing a lot of selfishness.
Yes,
Let's leave that one and go on to another one, which I've got from the Conservative campaign guide here. It's about pensions, and it says, the Conservative government has twice improved national insurance benefits so that they're now worth more than ever before.
Well,
that's a direct hit.
Well, that's pretty cool, I must say. When we got back to power, well, really,
I agree with you. Go on, Jim, you let them have it.
when we got back to power, the first thing we did before we did anything else was to more than double the old age pensions. What did this lot do? They waited until the steel barons had had their way, until the road hauliers had had their pick, until the excess profits levy had been repealed, and then 4 weeks before the election, they put up the old age pensions. And a fortnight after the election, we're going to start paying for them through the additional national insurance contribution. And what else? What else? This isn't the end of the story. When they put up the old age pensions, they decreased the national assistance relief that people were getting. I wonder if people really know what some of these people on national assistance are having to live on today. You get 37 and sixpence plus your rent, 5 and 4pence halfpenny a day. Do the Tories really feel proud of a budget in which Mr. Butler gives £40 million away to the City of London, and the ICI is raking in £750,000 by way of a tax bonus, and the old age pensioners are having their national assistance rates cut? I say they're a mean, skinflint lot, and it's time they were turned out.
Yeah,
good.
Well, there's another point that's not in today's papers, but it's been in nearly all the speeches and all the comments, and that's the suggestion that this is a dull election because there's no difference between the parties.
No.
Well, I'd like to say something about that. I'd like to say a lot about it. I think it's a deliberate policy to hand out, on the part of the Tory party, to hand out sedatives to prevent us from waking up to what the real issues are. I mean, they say, here we are, there's broad agreement amongst everybody, all agreed on policy.
I'm not.
No, exactly, but this is their line, this is their line, and this is what we've got to face and what we've got to answer. They say there's broad agreement. The only thing is, of course, that we are much better qualified than the Labour Party to carry it out. But they say, well, fair state, yes, fine, equality of opportunity, oh, we're with you 100%. And then the difference between the principles and the practice, no one knows that better than you, is very great. I mean, you take, for instance, the fairer distribution of wealth, to which you were just referring now. It's very interesting that under Labour it was almost impossible to, after tax, to get an income of more than 6,000 a year, which seems quite a good round sum, I should have said. But in 3.5 years, the Tories have brought that maximum up to 11,000. Well, that's the difference between principle and practice. And you referred, Jim, to what they handed out in this last particular budget, in which half went, I suppose, to profits, and those who were having dividends. Mr. Butler said that, I think he said he'd been inspired to do all this and to take the sixpence off the income tax by looking at the portrait of Mr. Gladstone. Well, I must say that I would like him very much to have looked at the portrait of later chancellors, not you, but of a radical chancellor, and I think he would have had very, very different priorities indeed. And I think it's quite mistaken to say that there is this broad agreement. It doesn't exist. We are trying to build up a completely different society, and that is really the issue in the cleavage.
I think we guessed, Lady Megan, that since you came into the Labour Party, you must have thought it was a bit different from the others. But does anybody want to add anything?
Well, I'd like to, may I say something about the budget? I always think the most striking figure of all is this, that, first of all, of course, nothing was given to people who are too poor to pay income tax at all. Then if you take the income tax, this is the position, that £19 million was given to 8.5 million people. 8.5 million people, that's the majority who pay income tax, who have incomes of £10 a week and less. and 25 million, more than the 19 million, substantially more than it, was given to 325,000 people who have £40 a week and upwards. And those people get 30 shillings a week out of the budget, and the £10 a week people and below get 10pence a week out of it.
Now, what about the chap who's earning under £5,
Well,
who will be
nothing at
paying,
all.
who will
Will
be a
be paying,
shilling?
exactly.
You'll be a shilling worse off.
Of course.
Well, of course, what can you expect from a Chancellor of the Exchequer who at the last election specifically promised that he wouldn't cut the food subsidies, and then in his first budget he took the first possible opportunity of doing it. But there's something funny about that chap.
Yes, but you know, while you people have been saying all these things, which I appreciate, I've been having a look at this Conservative campaign guide again in front of me. Now, I've been looking at what they say about monopolies and things like that. Well, honestly, it's awfully difficult to tell the difference between what they say and what you say.
Well, may I perhaps try and explain what is the difference? First of all, I'd like to make this point quite clear, that the Labour government was the first government of this country for 200 years to do anything at all about this problem. And we did set up the Monopolies Commission, and I think one can say it's done a pretty good job of work. It's made a number of inquiries, it's produced a number of reports, and so far as they go, they're very good reports. But it's desperately slow. Now, before we left office, you'll remember this, Herbert, before we left office, we had come to the conclusion, and we said so in the spring of 1951, that really this kind of pace wouldn't do. And we'd reached the conclusion that what we had to do was to ban outright certain restrictive practices. As a matter of fact, you all know, and everybody knows, the case of the tyre dealer in Stockport. It's been in the press a good deal lately. How he wanted to give his customers a slightly better deal, and how, as soon as he did this, along comes a snooper from the tyre manufacturers. They find out what he's doing, they summon him, they say, are you going to go on doing this? He says, yes, I am, because he's got some courage. And then they say, well, sorry, of course you won't have any more tyres. Well, that was the kind of thing we wanted to ban. Now, the Tories have been in office, and we've pressed them again and again on this, but they've done nothing. They had a miserable little act which provided for 3 vice-chairmen. Not a single vice-chairman has been appointed yet. The idea being, of course, that they were going to get on with the job faster. Nothing has happened at all. They've just gone on producing these reports, and you know, if they go on at this rate, it'll be 10 or 15 years before the present queue, as it were, of industries waiting to be investigated has got through.
Yes, but a report doesn't stop monopolies. What will you do?
No, all right. Well, I'll tell you. First of all, and we're perfectly precise on this, we would ban outright these particularly vicious restrictive practices. I've mentioned one of them, and everybody knows also about this business of tendering to local authorities.
I wonder if I can ask a question, Hugh. You're treasurer of the Labour Party.
Yes.
Do you ever get any subscriptions from these chaps, or do they all support the Conservative Party?
No, I'm sorry to have to tell you, James, the financial position has not benefited at all from monopolies of this character. But I want to I'm trying to tell you and everybody what we do propose to do. As I say, we want to ban these things outright. We certainly want to strengthen the Commission, and so that it can get on with the job much faster. But the third thing that I particularly want to mention is this. We think that what is needed here is a great deal more publicity. We would like to see all these associations registered and the details of the agreements published. And it's an interesting thing, you know, that in Sweden, under a Labour government, they've done just this very thing, and the result has been astonishing, because 40%, 2 out of every 5 of the associations, in the light of the public clamour there was about what was happening, have voluntarily dissolved themselves. Well, I don't know whether we should get quite such a good result here, but I think it's jolly well worth trying anyhow.
Well, could I say one thing on that?
Briefly.
Now,
Yes.
may I? Very briefly indeed, yes. It is a fact, of course, that the Commission must have very much stronger powers than it has now.
Yeah.
I mean, every case that they consider takes months and months and months. And if they go on at the rate now, it'll be probably the 200 years that you were speaking of, Hugh, before they really are able to come to decisions on most of the monopolies in this country. And the other thing I would like to say is that there's only, although the report has many times, has given several judgments against industries.
Yes.
There's not one single instance since the Conservative government came in when action has been taken against those monopolies. So the whole thing has been a complete farce. You were the only people, I think, who took action. That was in...
Yes, we're the only people who actually made an order forbidding a particular practice.
Well,
It is null and void.
if you were a Conservative, would you kill the goose that lays the golden egg? Of course you wouldn't.
No.
Look, I'm sorry to stop you on this, but I really have got a lot more questions, including one that I'm sure interests you. I've got one of this morning's papers here with a big headline saying, damaging effects of nationalisation. Well, and you've heard that from a lot of other quarters. This is the Financial Times. But you've heard it from working men too, and from a lot of other people. Nationalisation isn't working. I think it's a fair question.
Well, they really are wrong, you know. If you take the coal mines, you couldn't have gone back to things as they were.
Yeah, yeah.
It was inhuman for the miners, and it would have led to a lot of industrial trouble. It's true, we're paying a bit more for our coal. In fact, we're paying noticeably more for our coal. I want to be quite fair. But we were living on the unjust treatment of the miners in the earlier years, and it wasn't right. And we're getting gradually a better spirit in the mines. And taking the nationalised industries as a whole, the charges or prices that they make as a whole are lower than in the case of private industrial enterprise.
They've gone up.
People
less.
gone up less, that is to say, the prices and charges have gone up less. And people who single out the nationalised industries are really not being fair. Now let me say this as regards the general approach of the Labour Party to public ownership is that we believe in public ownership where the public interest is thereby furthered. We don't apply a universal, dogmatic, doctrinaire view about it, whereas the Conservatives tend to apply a doctrinaire, dogmatic view in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
We think that every case has got to be argued upon its merits, argued by us for the policy upon its merits, argued by the opponents on the merits against it, and to prove that private ownership is better. And that's our approach, and we think that as a whole public ownership has succeeded and has done a good job of work. Now, Megan, I have a recollection that the Liberals published a declaration about 1945. Now, was it really in conflict with what I've said or not?
Not in the very least. All I can do is to cross the T's and
Dot
dot the I's. That's right.
Yes, but there's a further question. I know a lot of people who wouldn't quarrel with what you've said, Mr. Morrison, but there's the problem of renationalisation and re-denationalisation and all the rest of it.
Well,
what about that?
What about
well, Jim will do
what
that.
about, let's deal with denationalisation first.
Yes.
What about the steel business? Why denationalise steel and give a present of £7 million to the shareholders that could have been kept in the industry? £7 million a year?
Yes.
£7 million
Yes.
a year. And what about transport? Here you've got the British public owns the most up-to-date, most modern, best equipped road transport fleet in the world. In the last 2 years it's made £17 million of profit. 17 million. And the Tories are selling it. They've got £75 million worth of lorries. They are ready to take offers to sell them for £55 million, and they're ready for the public to take a loss of £20 million. Don't let any Tory say groundnuts to me after that. This is absolutely monstrous, you know. What they are doing, and I charge them with this, they invited the road hauliers to subscribe to the Conservative Party funds. They promised them that if they subscribed, well, whether they subscribed or not, they said they were going to denationalise road transport. They are selling this profitable undertaking, and we are going to witness the breakup of the best road transport fleet this country's ever had. And I say it's a wicked, downright shame.
And the hauliers put Tory posters on their vehicles.
I'll say they did.
Mr. Callaghan, you're very eloquent, but can I have an answer to
And
my
I'm
question?
accurate, too.
Is it right to renationalise things that have been denationalised?
Well, it depends what damage has been done. As far as transport is concerned, there is a clear case. You cannot run transport in this country as close-knit industrial network of rail and road unless you've got the two working together. You cannot run this country if you're pulling them apart all the time. One or the other is going to sink. And the Tories don't care if it sinks as long as their friends make the profits.
Jim, isn't it the case also that the British road services have a much more efficient record than private enterprise? I mean, in the way the lorries are carrying more continuously heavy loads and so on?
Less empty return vehicles.
Yes, that's right. This really is so. They've got teleprinters at all the big provincial centres. They swap information about loads to go from one to the other, and so they save empty lorries moving. And there's one more point on this, you know, Mr. Pickles.
Aren't they more efficiently maintained, too?
Well, I was just coming on to that. What about this question of road safety now?
Yes, I agree with that.
More road deaths, more injuries per year, and yet we know that as these lorries go back into private hands, the standard of maintenance is not what it was, and drivers are being forced to drive longer hours than the law maintains. It's not done for their benefit, it's done for ours, because they're a menace on the road. And I say if Mr. Boyd Carpenter stopped fiddling about with selling the lorries and got on with dealing with road safety, we might make some dent into these road safety deaths that we've got.
Well, at least I'm not complaining that you're not answering questions. You've used up 2/3 of your time already. And I've got another one here, which another one here, which I think is important. This is from today's Daily Telegraph. Mr. Maudling, Minister of Supply, talking about controls and rationing, says, controls could not be used without rationing. They couldn't ration your grocer without rationing you. Now, who's in the dock on that?
Well,
You're in there.
All right. Well, I'll say quite simply, I don't wish to be vehement. The last thing I would do would be to use moderate language. I'd never dream of saying a word out of place.
Do use a little. It might brighten up the election.
Well, all I would say is that it's just
After all, you come from a quiet city, Cardiff.
it's just a downright Tory lie, and they know it is. And if Sir Anthony Eden is an honourable man, tomorrow night when he appears on this programme, I wonder if he's looking in now. If he is, Sir Anthony, I ask you, Mr. Prime Minister, repudiate this poster put up by your slick young gentleman in the Conservative Central Office. You know it's a lie. Say so, and you'll regain the honour of the Conservative Party.
May I, is there time for me to add a word on this? Well, the main argument, as I understand it, is that we propose to introduce price control in certain cases. And we're told that if we do that anywhere, at any time, it's going to mean rationing. Now, that is really about the silliest argument I've ever heard. As a matter of fact, at this moment, price control applies to bread, and it isn't ration. It applies to milk, and it isn't ration. Now, are we really to believe that you can't extend it to any other essential foodstuff? And not only that. We've been talking about steel a little time ago. The curious thing is that the Tory government themselves actually set up, when they denationalised steel, a board, one of whose main functions was to control the price of steel. Well, there's no rationing as far as I know there either. And of course, when the monopolies, which we've also been talking about, control prices, again, there's no rationing. And if the monopolies can control prices to swell their own profits, I say we can control them in order to keep those profits down and to protect consumers.
I agree.
Look, I've got another one here. I think this really is also one bowled straight at Gaitskell's wicket. A Conservative leaflet, socialists have themselves estimated that their proposals for social services would cost an extra 500 millions, and then 800 millions, 200 millions, 300 and so on. They add it up to 1,800 millions. Mr. MacLeod, which I've got a report of here, said yesterday 1,200 millions. And also suggested a lot of taxes that you were going to put on to pay it. What's the answer to that one?
Mr. Pickles, I'm very familiar indeed with these stories, and frankly I've been astonished during this election at the way the figures are produced. I can only assume that the Conservative Central Office thinks of a number and multiplies by 10. That's really what it seems to amount to. I think the best thing I can do really is just to briefly run over the programme and show you how absurd the whole idea is. First of all, there's a whole lot in it which doesn't involve any increased expenditure at all, or generates a negligible amount. What we've been talking about, monopolies, for instance. Well, that's not going to involve a lot more public spending. Then there are a lot of other things. One of them we haven't mentioned yet. That is allowing leaseholders to buy the freeholds.
Yeah.
I think, James, that in Cardiff is fairly important, the freehold of their property.
London home counties, too.
I give you another example, incidentally, where we shall be bringing in money because we have decided that it's about time that industry paid its proper share of the rates. And that will bring in money and will help local authorities and will indeed help ratepayers as well. Well, then, of course, there are certain items where there will be government expenditure, but it is self-financing. That is true, of course, of the renationalisation proposals. When we nationalised steel and road haulage, it didn't cost the budget anything. We took over certain assets, we gave the shareholders bonds, and, of course, the interest was paid on the bonds out of the profits or surplus earned in the nationalised industries. You do have, I quite agree, in our programme, certain items which will involve some increase. I'll try and go through them. First of all, there is the national assistance scales, where we think that jolly well has to be put up. Then there's post-war credits. We haven't had anything about that yet. But we believe that the time has come to speed up repayment here. This money is owed to the people of the country on the solemn promise of a coalition government. And it's really not good enough to pay it back at this rate when it's going to take 30 or 40 years to do it. Then certainly we do propose to develop our education system. Again, we haven't had time to talk about that in detail. But I can assure you that having been into all this, and you would expect after all that we would do so, I'm not in the least worried about the financing of it. On one condition, and I must make that condition, and that is that production goes up steadily, as it did under the Labour government between 1945 and 51. And to be fair, as it has done, though not so fast, under the Tories in these recent years. And the reason I say that is that as production goes up, earnings go up, and of course tax revenue increases as well. And we think it's perfectly proper that part of this tax revenue should be allocated, so to speak, for the development of the social services.
But let's get this quite straight.
Anyway.
Does that really mean that you do not expect to have to put up any taxes, or will you have to raise
I
them?
don't see any reason why we should put up taxes. Indeed, I would hope that there would be something of a margin to enable us to reduce taxes on lower incomes. But I want to be clear, Mr. Pickles, that isn't to say that I haven't any ideas of changing the tax system, because in fact I have. At the moment I think that people, there is too much tax evasion for one thing, and I think that people who get their money too easily get away too lightly with taxes. And I'd like to see some changes in that direction.
You won't be giving large contributions to companies and dividend.
I'm afraid I can't hold out very much hope of that.
You may save a little there.
I must stop you there because it's time I was asking the last question, and I'm going to put it to Mr. Morrison. I want to ask Mr. Morrison what, in his view, and he's got about 2 minutes or a bit more in which to answer it, what, in his view, is the real main issue, the deciding issue in this election?
Well, I think there's two main points. You see, running through these questions and answers, nearly every time is the issue as to whether the nation is going to be the master or the slave of its economic resources. How are we going to use the national revenues? How are we going to use the capital assets of the nation? How are we going to see to it that investment in industry is adequate in order to see that there shall be enough technical re-equipment so that the productivity and so on will be adequate? Now, our view is that John Bull, that is to say the British people, through government and parliament, has got to have a big voice in how this is to be done. And consequently, we think that government and parliament must have a hand in the business on behalf of the people, whereas the Conservatives believe in a policy of drift, as if there is nothing to be done about it except to leave the private owners of land and capital to do exactly as they like. And that runs right through the whole of this argument that we've been having tonight. The other thing is this, that we of the Labour Party have a long, passionate tradition in favour of the peace of the world. And we believe that we, including and especially our leader Clement Attlee, can handle this business better than the Conservatives. After all, Mr. Eden, Sir Anthony Eden, was against high-level talks in March. And the day afterwards he was thrown over by Sir Winston Churchill, who is no longer Prime Minister. And therefore we believe that we are more fit to handle the problem of peace, disarmament, and these beastly bombs than the Conservatives are.
But I want to say
and we want you to vote on the day of May 26th. Be sure you vote Labour.
Yeah.
Jolly good.
I never got my